Evelyn Hart had always believed there must be a place in the world where she belonged, a corner of the earth where someone might look at her and see more than a burden. But that place was never her father's ranch in northern Arizona, a lonely spread of land where the wind carried more warmth than the people inside the house. She had been 10 when her mother died, and in the years that followed, Evelyn became the silent shadow trailing behind her father's new wife. Marlene, a woman who believed beauty was a weapon, and children who weren't hers were problems to be solved. Evelyn grew into adolescence doing chores the ranch hands refused to do and sleeping in a drafty back room that smelled of dust and horse blankets. Her father rarely spoke to her unless it was to issue instructions. Fetch the water. Help the cook. You're too slow. Why can't you be more useful? She tried, Lord help her, she tried. She kept her voice soft, her steps light, and her presence nearly invisible. But it didn't matter. To Marlene, she was a reminder of the woman who came before. To her father, she was a mistake he didn't know how to mend. On the morning of her 19th birthday, Evelyn woke early, as she always did. She folded her thin blanket, tied her shoes, and went to the kitchen to start preparing breakfast. The sky was a pale blue, streaked with pink, and for one moment, the world seemed quiet enough to hope. But when she returned from fetching water, she found her small trunk barely filled with 2 dresses, a pair of worn boots, and the battered book her mother used to read from waiting by the ranch gate. Her father stood beside it, face set in a hard frown. "You're grown," he said, as if that explained anything. "I can't keep feeding someone who doesn't contribute enough. Times are difficult." Marlene watched from the porch, arms crossed, wearing the smug smile of someone who had finally gotten what she wanted. Evelyn felt the words like a hand around her throat. I don't have anywhere to go," she whispered. "Not my problem," her father said, turning away. "You'll manage." Those 2 words, "you'll manage," followed her long after she stepped off the property. She carried her trunk for a mile before realizing she couldn't take its weight anymore. She hid it under a cedar bush and walked on with only her small bag, a canteen, a crust of bread, and her mother's book. She had no real destination, only the certainty that staying meant an empty life and leaving meant a frightening freedom. The railroad tracks shimmered under the sun, stretching endlessly through the desert. Evelyn followed them, knowing trains passed every few days and towns always grew beside rails somewhere out there. She believed was a place she could restart her life. With every step, memories pressed in, her mother's laughter faint as a ghost, the scolding tones she endured for years, the nights she cried herself to sleep but learned to cry silently, so no one would complain about the noise. But as the sun climbed higher and the heat began to bite, her thoughts grew hazy. She hadn't eaten since dawn, and her canteen was half empty. By midday, the desert seemed to tremble around her, not harsh and cold as it often felt, but strangely alive, full of illusions that rippled like water. Finally, her legs gave way. She sank to her knees beside the tracks, dust clinging to her dress. Her throat burned. She tried to rise but couldn't. The land spun in circles, tilting, turning, swallowing her up. She pressed her cheek to the hot earth, telling herself she would get up in just a moment, just after she rested her eyes. But her eyes didn't reopen. Somewhere in the haze, she thought she heard hoofbeats, a distant drumbeat echoing against the ground. She wasn't sure if it was real or just her mind making noise to keep her awake. Then a shadow fell over her. A tall figure dismounted silently, moving with the grace of someone who knew the land better than he knew his own heartbeat. A hand, warm, steady, unexpectedly gentle, touched her shoulder. Evelyn tried to speak, but the desert swallowed her voice. As the world faded, her last thought was a strange, fragile hope. Maybe someone found me. Maybe someone won't pretend I'm invisible anymore. The figure lifted her carefully, as if she mattered. And for the first time in her life, she did. Taz rode along the narrow ridge that overlooked the desert flats, his dark hair tied back, the morning wind cutting across his face. He knew this land like he knew the rhythm of his own breath, every ridge, every cactus bloom, every whisper of sand that carried meaning. His people had survived here for generations, and despite everything that had happened between the Apache and the settlers, this land still felt sacred to him. But sacred places could feel lonely too. Taza had been a widower for nearly 4 years. His wife, Ayana, had died giving birth to their only child, little Sky. Her loss had carved a wound deep inside him, a wound no medicine man could heal. Every time he looked at the sun, her same soft eyes, her same curious smile, Taza felt both love and an ache that tied itself around his ribs. The tribe respected him. Many admired him. Some feared him. He was a warrior, a skilled rider, and a man who never failed to protect his people. But they also whispered that grief had built walls around him, walls no one dared climb. He kept mostly to himself. He hunted, he taught little Sky to read the land, and he helped the elders when they called for him. But laughter, joy, companionship, those belonged to another life. Ayana's life. He had promised himself he would never take another wife. His heart had already chosen one soul to love in this lifetime. So on that morning, when he saw the faint trail of footprints leading from the railroad tracks toward the open desert, he felt the same instinct he felt when he sensed danger: alert, focused, wary. But these prints were not from a trespassing cowboy or a scouting soldier. They were small, lightweight, hesitant. Someone was lost. He followed the trail, moving his horse at a slow trot so he wouldn't miss even the softest sign. The prints grew erratic, weaving, staggering. Whoever made them was weakening. A buzzard circled overhead. His stomach tightened. He found her collapsed near a patch of sagebrush, her dress coated in dust, her face sunburned, her lips cracking from thirst. She looked barely more than a girl, fragile, yet stubborn enough to have made it this far alone. He dismounted instantly. She was alive, but faint, her breathing shallow, her pulse fluttering like a trapped bird. Her hair had fallen messily around her shoulders, and her fingers curled in the dirt as if she'd tried to hold on until the very last moment. Taza knelt beside her. "Little one," he murmured softly in Apache. "You wander too far." Her eyelids fluttered at the sound of his voice. Her gaze lifted weakly, and for a heartbeat he saw confusion, fear, and then something else. Trust, not because she knew him, but because her strength had run out. She had no choice but to trust whoever found her. He looked around. No wagon, no horse, no sign of a camp nearby. "What happened to you?" he asked quietly, knowing she couldn't answer. She made the smallest sound, half whisper, half breath, before her eyes rolled closed again. Taza lifted her into his arms, surprised by how light she was. He carried wounded warriors heavier than her. She didn't even stir when he placed her on his horse. For a moment he wondered who she belonged to, what family had abandoned her, why anyone would let a young woman walk alone under the ruthless desert sun. But then he saw something that made his jaw tighten, a bruise on her upper arm, the faint outline of fingers. Someone had grabbed her. Hard. His hand closed into a fist. He would not leave her out here. He would not return her to whoever treated her like this. Taza swung onto the horse behind her, holding her upright with one arm while guiding the reins with the other. The sun beat down, but he rode with determination, heading toward the shaded canyon where he kept his small home, a place built from stone, wood, and years of quiet solitude. When they reached the canyon, little Sky ran out to greet him, stopping abruptly when he saw the unconscious girl. "Father?" The boy whispered, eyes wide. "She needs help," Taza said simply. "Bring water." and the medicine bundle. Little Sky obeyed immediately. Taza carried the girl inside and gently laid her on a bed of furs. When he brushed the hair away from her face, he felt something shift inside him, something he didn't expect, something he wasn't sure he wanted. A stirring of protectiveness. A reminder that he was still human, still capable of caring. As she breathed weakly, Taza sat beside her, watching her with a mix of worry and curiosity. He didn't know who she was or where she came from, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was not letting her go until she was safe. And fate, which he had long stopped believing in, had just delivered the forgotten daughter. Nobody wanted directly into the arms of a man who had never stopped longing for something, someone to heal his lonely heart. When Evelyn finally woke, the first thing she noticed was the smell of smoke-warm, woodsy, comforting. For a moment she panicked, thinking she was still outside in the desert, still alone, still dying. But then soft shadows flickered around her, thrown by the small fire crackling in the corner of the room, and she realized she was somewhere sheltered. Somewhere safe. Her throat felt raw, and her lips stung when she tried to wet them. She blinked slowly, trying to make sense of the place around her. The walls were made of smooth stone and cedar wood poles, decorated with woven blankets in deep reds and earthy browns. A warm pelt lay beneath her, soft against her cheek. She'd never slept on anything this gentle. Then she heard footsteps, light, quick, belonging to someone small. A boy peeked around the corner, perhaps 8 or 9, barefoot, dark-eyed, his hair tied neatly behind his neck. When he saw her awake, his face brightened with pure, innocent joy. "Father, she is awake," he shouted in a mix of English and Apache. Evelyn jerked upright instinctively, then winced as dizziness swept through her. Before she could collapse, a strong arm steadied her. It was him, the tall Apache who had found her. Taza. She hadn't known his name when she collapsed in the desert, but now that she could see him clearly, she felt a flutter of something she couldn't name. He was striking broad-shouldered, with a proud, angular jaw and eyes that seemed to hold entire stories in their quiet depths. His presence filled the room, not with danger, but with an unexpected calm. "You are safe," he said gently, guiding her back to the bedding. "You fainted from heat and hunger." Evelyn swallowed, her voice scratchy. I'm sorry." Taza's brow furrowed slightly. Why apologize for surviving? She didn't know how to answer. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with respect, with patience, with something close to care. Little Sky scooted forward, holding out a wooden cup filled with water. "Here, Father said you need this." Her hands trembled as she took it. "Thank you." The boy grinned, proud to be useful. "You're welcome." The water was cool as it slid down her throat, easing the burning dryness. Tears pricked her eyes, not from pain, but from the simple kindness of it all. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed. Taza noticed anyway. "You were alone out there," he said softly. "It wasn't a question." Evelyn nodded, staring into the cup. "I didn't have a place to go." He waited, giving her space to speak, something she wasn't used to. For most of her life, every word she spoke had been met with impatience or irritation. But Taza listened, truly listened. "My father sent me away," she said finally. The boy gasped softly. Taza single quotes, S jaw tightened. "But he didn't interrupt. There wasn't any room for me anymore," she continued, her voice breaking. "He said I was a burden." Little Sky's small hand crept into hers. "You're not a burden," he whispered. The words hit her harder than her father's rejection. Taza knelt beside his son and placed a hand on the boy's back. "She is not," he agreed quietly. His eyes held hers with a sincerity she almost couldn't bear. "You are safe here. Rest. No one will harm you." Evelyn had no reason to trust him and had only ever failed her, but something in his voice made her believe him. She tried to sit up again. "I don't want to trouble you, your family." Little Sky shook his head fiercely. "You can stay. You can read me stories. Father says I learn fast." Evelyn looked from the boy to his father. There was no resentment, no hesitation, only, "Welcome. This is your home until you choose to leave it," Taza said firmly, her breath caught. No one had ever offered her a home before, not one she was wanted in. The hours passed slowly as she recovered. The boy talked nonstop, showing her the woven mats, the carved bowls, the small painted stones he collected. Taza stayed nearby, moving with the quiet grace of a man accustomed to protecting others. When evening came and the fire glowed warm against the stone walls, Evelyn felt a peace she hadn't felt in years. She watched as Little Sky curled up beside her, his head against her arm, already trusting her completely. Outside, coyotes yipped in the distance. Inside, she felt safe. Truly safe. As Taza adjusted the blanket over her legs, their hands brushed. His touch was warm, steady, and she felt her heartbeat quicken. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. And for the first time in his, the widowed Apache felt the faint stirrings of something he thought he had buried with his lost wife. Hope. Days passed, and Evelyn settled into life at Taza's canyon home. At first, she felt like a guest, like someone who could be asked to leave at any moment. But the more she observed Taza and his son, the more she realized she was being treated differently than she had ever been in her life, not as an obligation, not as someone to be dismissed, but as a person whose presence mattered. Little Sky was a whirlwind of energy, running from room to room, his laughter echoing off the canyon walls. Evelyn found herself smiling, something she hadn't done without reserve in years. She showed him the pictures she had drawn as a child, stories she had written in the margins of her mother's book. And soon he begged her to read aloud every night. Taza watched quietly from the edge of the fire, observing the way Evelyn's voice softened when she spoke to the boy, the way she laughed at his clumsy attempts to repeat new words, the way she seemed to fill a space in the small home that had been empty since Ayana's death. It was subtle at first. A glance lingered too long. A hand brushed against hers while passing a bowl of food. The faint heat of shared proximity. But it grew into something more, something that could not be ignored. One afternoon, Taza took her out riding. She was nervous at first, unfamiliar with the ways of Apache horsemanship, but he guided her patiently, one hand at the reins, his other steady at her back. The wind tore at her hair, the desert stretching endless and golden around them. And for the first time, Evelyn felt freedom, unshackled from the judgments of her past. Taza rode beside her, his horse perfectly in step with hers, and she stole glances at him under the wide brim of her hat. He said little, but the quiet spoke volumes. She began to notice the small things, the way his eyes softened when he looked at his son, the way his fingers brushed lightly against hers when they adjusted the reins together, the faint scar along his jawline that told of battles survived. That evening, they returned to the canyon as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in blazing shades of orange and purple. Evelyn helped Little Sky with his lessons, and when the boy fell asleep at last, she found herself alone with Taza by the fire. The silence between them was charged, not awkward but intimate, as if every unspoken word carried weight. Taza stirred the embers, then looked at her with a depth of feeling that made her stomach twist. "You've grown quiet," he said softly, voice low and warm. I've never had this," she whispered. "This? Care. This safety." Taza's eyes held hers steadily. "You deserve it. You've always deserved it." Her breath caught. No one had ever said that to her, not her father, not anyone who claimed to care. She wanted to look away, to hide the fluttering in her chest, but she couldn't. I don't know how to. She stammered, helpless against the strange, new emotions flooding her. He reached for her hand. His fingers were strong but gentle, and when they touched hers, she felt a current of warmth that traveled through her whole body. She didn't pull away. She couldn't. Taza's voice was barely above a whisper. "It is all right to feel, Evelyn. You are allowed to be seen. You are allowed to matter." For the first time, she truly believed him. Days became weeks, and with each passing one, their bond deepened. They worked together in the canyon, prepared meals, shared stories of their pasts, and healed the wounds of loneliness together. Evelyn laughed more than she had in years. Taza felt a lightness he had thought impossible after Ayana's death. Then, one evening, as the desert wind sighed outside, Evelyn tripped while carrying a basket of herbs. Taza's hands caught her instinctively, holding her close. Their faces were inches apart. The firelight danced across his strong features, and her pulse raced. Neither spoke. Yet everything shifted in that suspended moment, the unspoken tension, the longing, the silent acknowledgement that something had awakened in both of them. It was slow, it was subtle, but it was undeniable. The beginnings of love, and though neither dared to speak it aloud yet, both knew the truth. Their hearts had found each other quietly, in a place where once only grief had lived. From that night onward, their connection was no longer just companionship. It was something more profound, a tether of trust, of warmth, of a promise neither could fully name. But both felt deep in their bones. And in that canyon, beneath the endless sky, a love began to bloom silent, steady, and unstoppable. The desert has a way of carrying voices, and not all of them are friendly. Evelyn had begun to feel at home with Taza and Little Sky. She rose each morning to the warmth of the canyon sun, helped Little Sky with his lessons, gathered herbs with Taza, and even learned the ways of riding across the arid land. For the first time, she felt as if she belonged somewhere, as if someone finally had chosen her. But peace is fragile in the West, especially for those who do not fit neatly into the world's rules. It started subtly. A shadow at the edge of the canyon, a whisper among the rocks. Evelyn first noticed it while fetching water from the nearby stream. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a rider watching, silhouetted against the horizon. But when she blinked, he was gone. She mentioned it to Taza that evening. "I saw someone watching us," she said, her voice tight. "A rider. I think he might be from the settlement." Taza's expression hardened. His eyes, usually calm, now held the sharpened focus of a predator tracking prey. "They are curious," he said, but his jaw clenched. "Or they see opportunity." "Opportunity?" she asked nervously. "They think you were taken," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "They think you belong to them." Evelyn's stomach churned. She had never felt so exposed. After all she had endured in her father's house, to be wanted for something she never gave, to be pursued as if she were property. The thought made her shiver. Days passed. The whispers grew louder. One evening, as the sun dipped below the distant mesas, she heard hoofbeats far across the plain. A group of men were approaching, kicking up dust and shouting commands. "Settle the boy inside," Taza instructed calmly, though his hand tightened on the bow he carried. "And stay out of sight." Little Sky's eyes widened, but he obeyed. Evelyn crouched behind a stack of firewood, heart hammering. The dust cloud grew larger, the riders unmistakable, now settlers from the town beyond the river. Men who believed the desert belonged to them. "They claim you were kidnapped," Taza said quietly, standing in front of her with a steady, unyielding gaze. His hand rested on his bow, fingers ready, but his posture radiated control, not fear. "They are wrong. You are here freely. You choose to be here." Evelyn wanted to speak, to confirm it, but the words caught in her throat. Fear and disbelief clashed in her chest. She had never been believed before. She had never been trusted to make her own choices. The settlers approached cautiously, scanning the canyon, trying to determine if she was present. One of them, a tall man with a red scarf, called out, "Step aside, or we'll come in and fetch the girl." Taza's voice rang clear and commanding. "She will not leave. Not by your orders. Not by your threats." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of dust and danger. The settlers hesitated, unsure how to challenge a man who radiated authority, a man who had claimed the land and lived in harmony with it. Evelyn, heart racing, found her courage. She stepped out from her hiding place, her voice shaking but loud enough to be heard. "I came here by my own choice. I am not taken. I am not yours." The settlers faltered, startled by her defiance. They had expected silence, perhaps tears, but not strength. Taza's eyes softened when they met hers. "Do you see?" he said. "You are not powerless. You are not a possession. You have a voice. You have a choice." Evelyn's chest heaved. She realized in that moment that for the first time, someone had truly believed in her, not out of obligation, not for appearances, but because he respected her, because he cared. The settlers, muttering under their breath, retreated for now. But Taza knew this was only the beginning. There would be whispers, rumors, and perhaps another attempt to take her back to the town that had abandoned her. He turned to Evelyn, placing a firm but gentle hand on her shoulder. "You are under my protection. I will not allow anyone to harm you." Her eyes filled with tears, not of fear, but of gratitude and awe. In him, she saw strength she had never known, protection she had never had, and a quiet, unwavering loyalty that made her feel safer than she had in her entire life. And in that moment, standing together in the desert dusk, Evelyn understood that danger could come from outside, but the true safety she craved was here, in the steadfast heart of the man who had found her in the sands, and in the bond that was beginning to grow between them. The desert whispered its secrets, and this time Evelyn listened not with fear, but with the knowledge that she was finally home. The desert night was alive with tension. Though the stars above shone like they had for centuries, indifferent to human fear. Evelyn sat beside the fire, trying to calm her racing heart, but every rustle of the wind, every snap of a twig, made her flinch. Little Sky had already fallen asleep, curled against a fur blanket, trusting completely in the man she had come to call father figure and perhaps something more. Taza had been unusually quiet since the day the settlers had appeared at the canyon's edge. He moved with the fluid precision of a predator, every motion deliberate, every sense alert. He had barricaded the entrance to the canyon with makeshift obstructions, placed the horses out of sight, and even taught Evelyn a few basic ways to defend herself, but nothing could fully prepare them for what came next. A distant cry echoed across the plains, followed by the pounding of hooves. The settlement men had returned, and they were closer now, their voices sharp, demanding, threatening. "They think they can take me," Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Taza's hand found hers instinctively. "They can try," he said, voice calm but deadly, "but they will fail." The first riders appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the moonlight. One of them, the same man who had shouted at her before, dismounted and approached the edge of the canyon. He shouted her name, demanding she come with him, claiming authority she had never granted. Evelyn's heart pounded. For a moment, she considered running, as she had so many times in her life, but something in Taza's steady presence anchored her. She was no longer a girl fleeing neglect and cruelty. She was someone who had been found and someone who had a voice. "I will not go with you." she shouted, her voice ringing across the canyon. "I am here by my own choice." The settlers sneered, incredulous that a young woman would defy them. One of them raised a pistol, pointing directly at Taza. Time slowed. Evelyn's mind raced, torn between fear and instinct. Without thinking, she stepped forward, placing herself between the man and Taza. "Stop!" she cried, her voice fierce. "You will not harm him, and you will not take me." The settlers hesitated, thrown off by her courage. They had expected submission, silence, weakness. They did not expect fire. Taza's eyes widened slightly, not in surprise, but in awe. His heart pounded as he realized the depth of her bravery. She was willing to risk everything for him. For the man who had saved her from a life of neglect and despair. He moved beside her, placing a protective arm around her shoulders, the other resting on his bow. "She is not yours," he said, voice like rolling thunder. "She is under my protection." The lead rider frowned. "You're Apache," he said, trying to sound threatening. "You can't keep her here." She belongs to herself," Taza interrupted, his tone cutting through the night like a knife. "And she chooses to stay." Evelyn's chest heaved, adrenaline and fear mingling with a fierce sense of agency. She had never felt so alive. She had never felt so powerful. For the first time, she was not the forgotten daughter, the unwanted girl. She was someone who mattered. Someone whose choices could not be ignored. The settlers exchanged uneasy glances. The canyon's natural walls made an obvious confrontation risky. The wind carried Taza's words, strong and unwavering, far across the open plains. The men slowly retreated, muttering threats they dared not carry out. Evelyn sank to her knees, trembling as Taza lowered his arm around her. She looked up at him, eyes wide with emotion, and he saw something there that touched him more deeply than words could express: gratitude, awe, trust. And something else. Something raw and undeniable. I was always afraid," she whispered, her voice catching. "Afraid of being alone. Afraid of being taken. Afraid no one would ever care." Taza's thumb brushed gently across her cheek. "I care," he said simply. "And I always will. You are not alone anymore. You will never be alone again." Tears ran down her face, unashamed, as the enormity of the moment sank in. Not only had she faced danger and survived, but she had claimed her own life, her own choices. And the man who had saved her had stood by her side, unwavering. That night, as the fire dwindled to glowing embers, Evelyn lay awake beside Taza and Little Sky. The desert whispered its secrets. But now, for the first time, Evelyn felt certain of one truth above all. Love, once found, could heal even the deepest wounds. And Taza, the widower who had carried the weight of grief for years, was ready to love again, with a heart renewed by courage, trust, and the unwavering bravery of the girl who had risked everything for him. The world had changed for them both, and neither would ever be the same. The morning after the settlers' retreat, the canyon seemed quieter, but the tension lingered like a ghost in the air. Evelyn rose with the sun, her body still trembling from the night before, but a new strength had taken root within her. She was no longer just a girl who had been abandoned, unwanted, and forgotten. She was someone who had faced danger, stood her ground, and survived not because anyone else saved her, but because she had found the courage to fight for herself. Little Sky bounced into the room, his dark eyes wide with excitement. "Did you hear? They didn't come back. They can't take you," he shouted, grabbing her hands. Evelyn laughed softly, ruffling his hair. "No, they can't," she said. The warmth in her chest surprised her. For so long, she had lived with fear and uncertainty. Now she felt something else entirely. Hope.Taza emerged from the shadows, watching them with a quiet smile. The lines of grief that had etched themselves into his face softened as he saw Evelyn's laughter and the ease with which she had begun to inhabit the canyon. His heart, long closed, stirred in ways he had thought impossible after Ayana's death. "You are remarkable," he said quietly, joining them. "I have never known anyone to face such fear and still rise so strong." Evelyn looked at him, her throat tight with emotion. "I wouldn't be here without you," she whispered. "You saved me, not just from the desert, but from being invisible all my life." Taza knelt beside her, taking both her hands in his. His eyes, dark and steady, held a depth that left her breathless. "You have always mattered, Evelyn. You were never invisible. You were simply waiting to be seen. And now, you are seen." Her heart raced as she absorbed his words. She had longed for someone to truly see her, to value her. And now that desire was realized not with empty promises, but with a man whose actions proved every word. Days turned into weeks. Evelyn became an integral part of the Canyon household. She taught little Sky to read from the scraps of her mother's book, helped with meals, and even learned to ride alongside Taza during hunts and expeditions across the desert plains. Each day, her confidence grew, and each day, the bond between her and Taza deepened. One evening, after a long day of gathering herbs, Taza and Evelyn sat together by the fire. The boy had fallen asleep early, exhausted from the day's adventures. The desert stretched around them in endless shadows, the moon casting a gentle silver light across the rocks. Taza's hand brushed hers as he passed a basket of food. Neither pulled away. The simple contact was electric, filling the space between them with unspoken longing. "You have brought light back into this home," Taza said softly. "Not just for little Sky. For me. I thought I would never feel joy like this again." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "I never thought I would feel it either," she admitted. "I never thought I would. Be loved. Not really." He reached for her face, cupping her cheek gently. His thumb brushed against her skin, warm and reassuring. "You are loved," he said. "More than you know. And I will spend every day proving it to you." Evelyn leaned into his touch, feeling the weight of years of loneliness and rejection begin to lift. She had always believed love was something she would never deserve. Now, she understood it was something she had always carried within herself, waiting for someone to recognize it. The desert wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the scent of sage and distant wildflowers. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet of the night and the warmth of firelight, Evelyn and Taza allowed themselves to acknowledge what had been growing between them. She rested her forehead against his. I never thought I could be happy," she said softly. "You can," he replied, voice steady, full of certainty. "With me. With us. You will never be alone again." The magnitude of his words filled her heart, washing away years of sorrow. Evelyn realized that love could be tender and fierce, protective and freeing all at once. She understood now that the bond they shared was more than passion. It was healing, it was family. It was a promise of belonging she had never dared to imagine. And as the fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows on the canyon walls, Evelyn knew one thing with absolute clarity. She had found her place in the world. She had found the man who could see her worth, the son who needed her care, and a home shaped not by blood or circumstance, but by love. Taza pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was a rhythm she could finally trust. For the first time in her life, she was not afraid. She was loved. And that love would carry them both through whatever the world dared to throw at them next. The desert dawn was pale and quiet, as if the world itself had paused to watch the new life unfolding in Taza's canyon. Evelyn stirred beneath the soft blankets, glancing at little Sky, who was already awake and chattering excitedly about the morning hunt. Her heart swelled with a sense of belonging she had never known. For the first time in her life, she was not invisible. She was wanted. She was loved. Taza emerged from the shadows, his dark eyes scanning the horizon before settling on her. The lines of grief that had once etched his face were softened now by joy and contentment. He had survived loss, heartbreak, and the harshness of the world, and yet here he was, with a family that had chosen him as much as he had chosen it. Evelyn stood and greeted him with a shy smile. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning, my heart," he replied, his voice carrying a warmth that made her chest ache in the best possible way. Little Sky tugged at her hand. "Come on, we're going to ride before breakfast." Evelyn laughed, the sound ringing clear and unburdened. She felt Taza's gaze follow her as she helped little Sky prepare the horses. In that gaze, she read something she hadn't expected so soon: pride, love, protection, and a promise of forever. After breakfast, they rode together through the desert, the wind whipping around them, lifting their spirits along with the scent of sage and wildflowers. The land, which had once seemed harsh and unforgiving to Evelyn, now felt like home, a place where life could thrive, where hearts could heal, and where love could grow in defiance of pain and neglect. Taza and Evelyn rode side by side, their hands brushing occasionally, sending small shocks of connection through them both. Little Sky rode ahead, calling back to them with laughter and delight. Every moment felt vivid, alive, and impossibly precious. Later, as the sun began its descent, they returned to the canyon where the fire flickered in the evening light. Evelyn prepared tea while Taza tended the hearth, and little Sky traced patterns in the sand nearby. The routine was simple, yet each gesture carried significance. They were building life together, not out of necessity, but out of choice and love. Evelyn finally spoke what had been stirring in her heart for weeks. "Taza, I never believed I would find someone who could care for me like this. I never thought I would be wanted. Not truly. Not like this." Taza set down the kettle and knelt before her, taking both her hands in his. "You were always meant to be found," he said quietly, "and I am honored that you chose me as your family. You have given my son and me a gift we never dreamed possible. You have given us hope, joy, and love." Tears pricked Evelyn's eyes. She had spent years carrying the weight of rejection and abandonment, but those years melted away in the warmth of his words. Here, with Taza, she was not just accepted, she was cherished. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you in the desert. You are brave, kind, and strong, and I will spend my life proving that you are treasured every single day." Evelyn felt her heart swell with a mix of relief, gratitude, and fierce, unshakable love. "I love you too, Taza," she whispered. Their kiss was gentle at first, an affirmation of everything they had endured and overcome. But it deepened, carrying the weight of unspoken promises, healing, and a future they would face together. Little Sky clapped his hands in delight from the sand, and they both laughed, breaking the quiet tension and sealing their bond with the simplicity of joy. That night, as the fire dwindled to embers, Evelyn lay nestled against Taza's chest. Little Sky curled at her feet. The desert wind whispered through the canyon, carrying a sense of peace and permanence. For the first time, Evelyn felt the extraordinary truth. She was home. She was safe. She was loved. The Apache warrior who had once carried grief like a stone had been transformed by her presence, and the girl who had been unwanted and abandoned had blossomed into the heart of a new family. Together, they had turned pain into love, loneliness into belonging, and uncertainty into a promise of tomorrow. In the quiet of the canyon, under the endless sweep of stars, they knew one thing for certain: The most beautiful love story is not born of perfection, but of courage, forgiveness, and the choice to stay when life has tried to push you apart. Evelyn, Taza, and little Sky had found that love, and with it, a home that would never abandon them again, and the desert, which had once seemed so harsh and lonely, now bore witness to their triumph, a family forged in fire, bound by heart, and blessed with the kind of love that endures all.